from the papers that I read of yours, of course, it's neuroscience, it's computational neuroscience, all of that. But then what, kind of like for your operationalizing and even for more the empirical formalisms, let's say, what you use is information geometry. And if I recall correct, a big influence on you was Melanie Weber's work with geometric machine learning. So I'd love to hear, firstly, how do you come across geometric machine learning? And then where do you see this opportunity or this gap, so to speak, that you could exploit in either in neuroscience or in second-person neuroscience or in even active inference to incorporate the work of Melanie Weber and geometric machine learning?
Absolutely. Yeah. Melanie Weber happened to pass through Leipzig as well, which is where I'm based at right now. At a different Max Planck, there's 3 here in the city. I'm at the one for human cognitive and brain sciences, and she spent some time working with Jürgen Joost at the Max Planck for applied mathematics. And her work is amazing. I think the paper on geometric machine learning is one of the main references, as you point out, but a lot of her work is just, pushing the boundaries on how we can incorporate geometry into so many fields. I think that is the one that resonated the most with me when I was in search for a solution to the crux of hyperscanning. And it pushed me from node metrics to edge-centric geometry in a nutshell. That would be sort of the way to summarize the shift that I had in my point of view. And maybe to explain that a little, curvature tells you if an edge lives in a tight cluster or if it's bridging modules, right? So that allowed me to quantify reconfiguration and information routing in interbrain networks, which current hyperscanning techniques and modeling techniques can't really do. So they're really good at, giving you snapshots of brain correlates, but they cannot move beyond that descriptive picture of, the shape of a network to an actual more mechanistically oriented take on multi-brain data. So yeah, Melanie's work has been crucial for that. I did go through other references, like for instance traveling waves, etc., other great sort of like modeling techniques that are out there at the moment, but this one resonated particularly well with me because a friend of mine put it nicely the other day in thinking of these broad interdisciplinary attempts where you're like borrowing an entire mathematical framework to make sense of your empiric data, right? And he referred to it in a way that I liked, and I felt that it applied for this case, which is like it enabled me to traverse from one space of data to a space of explanation where currently there's no traversing. It's still just the data that's being described, right, in hyperscanning research. So I think this nice attempt is that we're working on and collaborating on has that sort of promise to traverse towards the space of actual knowledge about interbrain networks and not just have a collection of simultaneous snapshots of brains that are interacting.
On a personal note, how have you find it? I mean, I'm not sure if you have a background in mathematics before you started working on this. Yeah, so I'm curious. I mean, because this is something I'm trying. I did a few like basic algebra and calculus stuff for my computer science degree, and after that, I kind of forgot about it for like a few years while I was, a software engineer, and now I'm revisiting a lot of. In fact, I've got this. I don't know if this book called Mathematics for Machine Learning, and like I'm slowly, punctiliously going through it, and it's not gonna lie, I'm not intuitively, I haven't got like an intuitively mathematical brain, so it's a lot of work. But in your case, you're like a researcher publishing with an applied mathematician. So how have you found that journey working with someone like Melanie Weber?
Oh, it's amazing. I thought, I mean, I'm positively overwhelmed, I want to say, very often.
Lovely.
And that's also, a state of mind that I enjoy being in. So I guess that helps. But that's sort of like a positive twist of an euphemism to say that it's, uncharted territory for sure. In regards to my background, I think it does help a lot to be working with, one of the world experts in the matter, where during our conversations I get to enjoy, the privilege of receiving like a very straightforward sort of a la toy model, or a la back to high school type of examples for
Yes.
making sense
Beautiful.
of categories of geometry, etc., and what those concepts look like if you play it in a yeah, maybe if precisely if you play with it, so that has definitely eased my way into it. I should make a little shout out here to work by Mathilde Papillon, who's like big in the neural geometry scene, who just put out a couple of months ago, I think, a big sort of primer on geometry that is really nice. I think it's called Beyond Euclid, which is also like it's like a crash course on its own to understand how geometric manifolds and such can be applied or can be relevant in a very accessible way to different kinds of disciplines. I think in our case, it was it was a very sort of like educated guess or an intuition game. At the very start, I have to be transparent about that, without having like fully understood how the Foreman-Ricci curvature and the Olivier curvature, which we employ in our pipeline, fully to all its details and all its sort of like granular aspects, operationalizes the spread of a network. We were already testing it, right? So I guess that's the empiric part that I brought also to the table, which is, okay, let's just make sense of it by testing, right? And then we sort of like try to understand the concepts also as we go. So I think it's both an exercise of approaching the math as math, but also seeing what it does to our data, knowing how the data usually works. So I guess it goes a bit both ways. But as I started, I definitely have had the privilege of having it laid out by an expert in a very accessible way. And yeah, so shout out to Melanie Weber for running me through those complex math as a complete noob.
Oh man, I mean I think that's wonderful. That's what I love about this kind of cross collaboration and interdisciplinary work.
Yeah.
And especially for you as a publishing researcher, it's probably just, as you were saying, you said overwhelmed with positivity or joy, almost like a eureka moment.
Yeah.
And
I do
that's
have
great.
to add to that I believe that the actual person that introduced me to her work was my other colleague, Noah Guzman, former Caltech. He was at under Yves Marder for his master's, and I believe he was the one that sort of suggested that we look into geometry, and so I think that's how we found out about Melanie's work at the beginning. It was probably through brainstorming with Noah. But yeah, it has been a ride for sure to try to make sense of all these intricate formalisms that at the same time feel so intuitive once you get a little hold on them. And I think that's sort of what has been refreshing for me, going back to the point of moving beyond stale critique into geometry and into active inference, and into modeling the diet as a unit, right? It's allowed me to formalize live interaction and to link it to neural data rather than having anecdotes, or as I guess Stephen Jay Gould would have called it, just so stories, right? So I think it everything plays a part in this, and yeah, I'm just really glad to have this amazing team that allows me to put all these elements together.
No doubt, no doubt. And just again, for me as a layperson, as a student, I can see, especially the two papers you share with me. I've been trying to look at the references and see what other stuff to read through that.
Yeah.
And I've got a list now that I've got to get through on weekends,
Nice.
including a lecture on the full moon Richard curvature, because I've got to admit it, like, I still have, it hasn't, hit my, like, I haven't really grokked it yet. So I need to
Yeah.
spend some time with the idea.
Yeah, I will
Go ahead,
host
please.
like a little session, like a part of a talk that I will give at Carl Friston's theoretical neurobiology seminar series, I guess. I guess I call it seminar series. Can't remember. That's gonna happen in November. Part of that will be a bit of a primer on the curvature. So I'll
That
definitely
would be
share
super
that.
useful. Will it be
Yeah.
streamed, or is it going to be? I
Yeah,
hope
yeah.
it's going to be
I think
streamed.
it's streamed and publicly available.
Lovely,
I
lovely. Yeah,
can't
yeah,
remember the date right now, but I mean, it goes without saying, um, one should go to the source, namely videos of Melanie Weber on YouTube, talking
yes,
about
it's one of the.
curvature. But I will
I
be
will
talking about
leave them in the
how
show
this
notes
works
too.
for interbrain networks.
Yes, in fact, I will leave some of a couple of the videos I've got bookmarked are some of Melanie's videos, so I'll leave them in the show notes too. But yeah, that'd be
Nice.
great
Yeah.
if you could please record and not record, sorry, Nico. I was thinking of the Richie Kovic, and
Not yet.
to go through that. Yeah. So also the other paper you mentioned, and this too I'll leave in the show notes, was Beyond Euclid: An Illustrated Guide to Modern
Yeah.
Machine Learning with
Yeah.
Geometric, Topological, and Algebraic Structures. Great, awesome. I'll give
Yeah.
it a read too.
Yeah.
Excellent. So to kind of get back to a bit of your work now. So firstly, there
Sure.
are a few terms I think I want to clarify here. Now, we probably are gonna jump a little bit between, if that's okay, between
Sure.
this conference paper, which is the Ontogeometry of Interbrain Networks, and then the previous paper you shared with me, the one with Melanie and more like Mahao and all of them, which is the one on geometric hyperscanning under active inference. Firstly, so I mean, just again for like my layperson's understanding of hyperscanning is basically right now, if some neuroscientists measures our brain activity, you and I interacting, that probably would be considered hyperscanning, because we're, I mean, using I don't know, some methodology, because it's sort of like there's a dyadic coupling, I guess, or whatever you may call it, where they're interacting with each other. And this is, of course, not something. In fact, can you probably perhaps give a quick primer into maybe the history of what hyperscanning is and how it kind of
Sure.
came into being in neuroscience?
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So I could start by saying that it's a relatively still nascent field. In a nutshell, hyperscanning just means a simultaneous recording of the brains of two people or more to quantify interbrain relations, right? And traditionally, it has a node-based approach. So correlations or coherence between regions, for instance, or phase and power values of the oscillations, right? So it mainly captures synchrony levels. That's where we come in, because we think it's missing, the informational routing and topology. So we're trying to shift towards an edge-based approach that starts with geometry as a base to make an intuition for this. And so we try to build interbrain graphs and track different curvature metrics. That's where the Foreman-Ricci comes in, or the Olivier. And also its entropy, so the entropy of the curvature over time. So that allows us to detect phase transitions and shifts in information routing during interaction. But hyperscanning as such is born within social neuroscience. And social neuroscience has different paradigms. One of them being a classic, third-person perspective inference style or constraints for paradigms where you infer, for instance, the states of another by observation. And Leonard Schilbach, our collaborator, is the proponent of so-called second-person neuroscience, which tries to situate paradigms within live reciprocal engagement led circumstances, right? So that's been a huge game changer for us, because it immediately puts a bit the burden on the researcher to decide to what extent you want to acknowledge and model the dyad as a unit. Do you want to leave it out and sort of like use discourse to leave it out, right? To explain it away of your research, which sort of like is what I'm trying to echo here towards the the staleness that I'm ascribing to critique in that regard, because I've seen too many papers mentioning a broad theoretical landscape that we should acknowledge, and then the experimental paradigm itself is like a very reduced droplet out of that, and I think we can do more, right? So I think let's just go straight into a more second-person oriented neuroscience. It has, of course, its different scales or steps towards sort of an ideal, fully real-time reciprocal neuroscience that I don't know how or when we would achieve. But on the path towards that, we want to turn the dyad, the unit of measurement, where reciprocal sensing and acting is linking two generative models into one evolving system, right? And I think that is what should make a difference in truly showcasing what hyperscanning can be about, not just simultaneous snapshots, but actual involvement into what interaction means.
So when you kind of say simultaneous snapshots, like I'm just going to read this from the abstract for
Sure.
in the On Geometry of Interbrain Networks paper. You say here, effective analysis in neuroscience benefits significantly from robust conceptual frameworks. Fine, great. Then you say here, traditional metrics of interbrain synchrony in social neuroscience typically depends on fixed correlation-based approaches, restricting their explanatory capacity to descriptive observations. So, I mean, I'm curious, like, I feel like this correlation-based approaches is kind of the, if I could put it this way, the antithesis to what you're proposing with geometric hyperscanning. And like,
Somewhat,
maybe
yeah.
if you could kind of flesh that out a bit more, what like the more traditional correlation-based approach is, and then again for a lay audience here, if you could like explicate where that's lacking.
Sure. So maybe I should say that the main gist here is to render dynamics tractable via network geometry, which have been relinquished to theory or critique, right? That's sort of the entire spin that we want to give to hyperscanning. And there's been already great articles, for instance, by Antonia Hamilton on the hype of hyperscanning, right? Just call for, be reasonable about all of the assumptions that one ascribes sort of to this brilliant new methodology, given that it is just capturing, now I'm going into the actual explanation, activations of regions of the brain or of oscillations, so the electric currents, let's say, of the brain. Depending on the methodology that you use, it would be either electric or hemodynamic, so blood flow, etc. But in a nutshell, it would be regions that are involved according to the canon of cognitive neuroanatomy in a specific phenomenon via how they relate to a cognitive ability that allows you to engage in a task that requires it. And so this is amazing, of course. So in that sense, I'm not entirely on board with being an antithesis to that, because it's more like I'm building.
Absolutely, I use that term a bit
that,
provocatively.
I know.
Yeah.
But I will put on that shirt when it comes to defend the specific method, but in a way we're expanding and trying to create a lineage from that tradition, and to say this is just the next natural step in moving from this highly technical descriptive level to one that can inform mechanisms within social neuroscience, and perhaps elevate social neuroscience towards systems neuroscience status or similar, where you actually try to move beyond these coherence or correlation based approaches, where basically you see all of these activations that I was referring to in so-called ROI, so regions of interest across the brain. Sometimes they will correspond to areas from the canon of neuroanatomy, sometimes not, but that's why we call them ROIs, and move into an actual insight into how they are related amongst each other, given that the current situation is that you will see co-activation. I guess that's a better term to describe what we can see nowadays in interacting diets and their brains. You see that maybe we activate the same region, maybe we activate regions that we theorize are complementary to each other, between the people within the diet. So I'm thinking, okay, so why don't we double down on that and actually try to quantify how information could be flowing between those brains? And if we take each brain on its own as a network, we can calculate an interbrain network that is sort of like a third brain, if you will, that stems out of that, and we can calculate whether the spread of the information routing at any point in time is leaning more towards a local one or a global one, and then try to correlate that towards against, or regress it against, I should say, our behavioral data, for instance, and thus trying to, as I said before, render some of the dynamics that are relevant to social neuroscience actually tractable, and no longer relinquish them to, or explaining them away in our research.